Welcome back to Creative Brain Week. Welcome to the first Keynote presentation. I am so delighted to be able to do this one. And it links in all sorts of wonderful ways to the one that we've just had. I'm about to introduce to you the kind of phenomenal, I'm slightly in awe of Donald Herman, who's currently Global Lead for Cognitive Human Enterprise at EY. Donald's background, he is from Sligo. He trained at the University of Limerick in aerodynamics. And what he's doing at EY is he's a global lead and co-founder of a brand new, hot off the press, I think it's less than months old at this point, I think, to create, co-founded this initiative to create the Cognitive Human Enterprise, which is a new approach to combining massive multidisciplinary collaboration and full spectrum diversity to maximize organizational cognitive flexibility. And one of the great things about this is it is the place, I think, where arts and creativity and science are really at the kind of new edge of what is or might be possible. So Donald, are you here? Are you there? Can you hear us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Perfectly well.
Wow, great.
Very nice to have you. I'd like to hand over to you and take us away, and then we might come back afterwards for a few questions.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for the introduction and the opportunity to share the work we're doing. You know, I'm going to go through things pretty quick, and what I'm going to do is share with you all how we are kind of telling some of the narratives and the ways we are explaining the value of bringing artists deep into technology, deep into business. And I won't go into my background, but if we have time for Q&A, I'll share a little bit more about why me as an engineer is doing this type of work. But I want to give examples, I want to give ways of thinking. I want to share with you the value we see in bringing artists in particular deep into technology, into business. And in my title there, I've underlined human creativity very purposefully, and hopefully you'll get a sense of why I did that as we go through. So, you know, the world I come from is, you know, big business, big technology. And when you read the media, there's a lot of hype and a lot of false narrative that there is this continuous, ever-increasing battle between humans and machines. And I don't personally believe in this. You know, we invent technology and we co-evolve with technology. And of course, technology can be used for good and bad. There's no denying that. But for the most part, I think technology helps humanity always kind of evolve towards some better state, albeit there's negatives along the way for sure. So I think this false narrative stems from really a lack of understanding. And some of this lack of understanding comes from the fact that in technology, there's kind of, well, I call it two competing philosophies, but in fact, there's one very dominant philosophy. And the dominant philosophy is where engineers, scientists, technologists develop technologies, whether it's algorithms, ways of looking at data, whether it's machine learning, artificial intelligence, and they develop those technologies with the sole purpose of becoming more creative or more intelligent than humans. And you can see if that's your lens through which you develop the technology and that's your goal, you can see how it might drive certain media headlines and certain fear with people thinking that the technology will supplant or supersede or go beyond human creativity and intelligence. And I fundamentally believe that that approach is kind of flawed from a human perspective. I don't believe the technology will supplant our human intelligence and creativity, and I'll explain why in a few slides. We have a very different philosophy, and our philosophy is how do we develop technology to be in service of our humanity, to be in service of society? How can we develop technology to augment and enhance our creative human potential? And we work, and I've been working for several years now prior to EY in this space. We're working at bringing artists at scale deeply into how we develop our technologies and our business and how we try and inform a whole new way of thinking about taking that artistic perspective, philosophy, aesthetic, and the process of being an artist, which a lot of people don't really talk about in the business and tech world, but the process of that, how do we bring that deep in and inform much more human-centric ways of building out this with the human condition being the lens and the core of everything we do. So I kind of talk about it as humans times machines. How do we take the best of humanity, pair it with the best of technology, and how can the combination of that be more than either on their own? So I'm going to give you some examples on some of the ways I share new ways of thinking, or to provoke people to think in business and technology in new ways, and to bring the arts in and think about creativity and innovation in these things. And I'm going to talk a little bit about human intelligence and creativity versus machine or artificial intelligence and creativity. And I just abbreviate it here as INC. So counter to popular belief, algorithms and machine learning and artificial quote unquote intelligence know nothing. Like they have no understanding, no intelligence, and therefore they cannot be creative. They're exceptionally well trained in a very limited way. Data is given to them through zeros and ones. By the way, humans don't think in zeros and ones, just so the machine is already getting data in a different form than the human. It's applying computation and memory and applying probabilities to this data, and it's trained in a very siloed, very niche, limited, narrow way. And then in some tasks, that technology, those machines can do some jobs better than humans, can operate at a different speed, can operate at a different scale. So there's this idea that some of the more quote unquote mundane tasks out there can be automated, and some of that is happening for sure. But this notion that algorithms, ML, AI, machine learning, artificial intelligence will supersede or supplant human intelligence, I think is just way off the mark entirely. And I'll try and give you some of my reasoning on why I believe that's a true statement. So first of all, the algorithms today are largely based on a premise of how people thought the brain worked like about 70 years ago, 60, 70 years ago. And people started modeling or trying to model the way the human brain works through these neural nets. And then they started applying that through these ideas of computational neural nets or artificial intelligence. So the model we use today is actually built on a very weak foundation based on the knowledge of 70 years ago. And our understanding of the brain and neuroscience and computation and everything has obviously moved on drastically since then. So that's already an indication of maybe where we need to start questioning what intelligence means in some of this terminology. But here's a fun kind of thought experiment I like to do with people. If we compare human intelligence to machine intelligence, so let's just say we could remove the human brain from the body, but we could keep it alive, but we completely disconnect it. What utility or what functionality does the human brain have if it is not connected to the human body? And the answer is, in fact, it has zero. I mean, the human brain has no functionality without being connected to the human body. The human brain is connected through our sensory perception. We have all this input data that comes from the world around us, ourselves to the exterior and ourselves to within ourselves. All of that information gets ingested and synthesized, and interesting things are done with that information in the brain. And then somehow all of that comes together in a magical way to create consciousness, human intelligence, creativity, all these things that are, quite uniquely human for the large part. So if the brain has no functionality, no consciousness, no intelligence, no creativity without connection to the body, then what does that tell us about machine intelligence? So if machines get all of their data in the form of zeros and ones, which we do not as humans, and if machine intelligence, quote unquote, is an intelligence that doesn't relate to the lived experience of a human, that doesn't relate in any way to human evolution, genetics, biology, physiology, psychology, all of the ologies you can imagine. And if machine intelligence is something that doesn't have this connection to the outer world or to an inner world, then what does machine intelligence or artificial intelligence even mean? Right? Because again, intelligence is, in my view, a uniquely human trait, and it's a word that was defined by humans when we invented language. So this idea of calling the technology, anything with a machine or artificial, as intelligence, I think is a really unfortunate wording and a terminology that stems again from about 50, 60, 70 years ago or so. And it caused a lot of this fear, causes this lack of understanding, and it drives a lot of people to try and create technology that will be more intelligent, quote unquote, than humans, without them actually understanding what human intelligence really is versus what machine intelligence even is. So here's another extension of this argument. In humans, we across the world, there's about 9 different types of intelligence. There's about 9 different ways of thinking. I'll ask you, anyone that works in computational science or otherwise, how many different modes of intelligence or ways of thinking do any of the algorithms or the machines have? So again, this idea of machinery or technology, algorithms becoming more intelligent, more creative than us humans, I think is just a fundamentally flawed premise. It shows a complete lack of understanding of humans and our humanity and what makes us unique. And it shows, and it's assuming and giving traits and imbuing traits to the algorithms way beyond that which they deserve today. So I'm going to give you an example of work I've done in the past. So we're continuing this type of work with a range of artists today, and I can share more in the Q&A. So this is work with an artist, a beatboxer. So one of these people that can make his voice sound like a machine. And a few years ago, he felt that he had reached his absolute pinnacle of pushing his voice. He was the most experimental beatboxer that has ever lived, one of the best that has ever lived. And he felt he had saturated how he could push it. And he started branching off into whole other different areas of creativity beyond beatboxing. And we were having conversations, we were collaborating, we were talking about how frustrated both of us are with the false narrative in the media, the lack of understanding, and the level of fear that drives around things like machine learning and artificial intelligence. And we said, why don't we try and come up with a way of showing the potential for machine learning and artificial intelligence to actually enhance human creativity and enhance human potential. So we figured out if we could develop the machine learning algorithms to augment his creativity rather than supplant it, that this could be a very unique way of trying to show the world and that there is a different approach. Like there's a way that the technology can be in service to us as humans. So what we did is we trained machine learning algorithms on his beatboxing, on his voice, doing his various techniques. And after a period of time, the algorithms reached a level of maturity where they gave him back sounds that very much sounded like him. It sounded like his voice. You could hear his breath in it. The techniques kind of sounded like him. So there was a level of common ground there built, but there was new sounds and new techniques that the algorithms created that were distinctly different from him, went beyond his capability. And there were things that he has never performed in his life or absolutely didn't give it to the training mechanism of the machine learning. So what we ended up happening now was something that was uniquely like him, but yet distinctly different. And we call this second self, or you could consider it as an AI digital beatboxing twin of him. And then what we did is to take it to the next level to see how he could interact with that and how that might push him beyond where he currently was. We gave him the ability in a collaboration with another organization called DataBots to be able to live real-time collaborate with this second self. And in the process of being able to collaborate with second self, he is, in his own words, leveled up his voice, where he's creating sounds and techniques and he's doing things with his voice beyond what he ever thought was capable. And this is very interesting to me. So think about this. We took one of the best in his field today, in his genre, one of the best in that area that has ever lived. He's one of the most creative people I've ever worked with. And we developed machine learning algorithms trained by him, which then gave him back different things that he has ever done in his life. And in the process of him being able to interact with that second self or that digital variation of him, he's been able to level up his voice, increase his creativity, compose, perform, create in entirely new ways that he didn't think were possible just a few years ago. So if we can do that for him, can you imagine what we might be able to do for the rest of us? And that for me is where, with the right philosophy, the right understanding of our humanity, the right understanding of the technology, that we can bring all of this together and actually help all of humanity to the greatest extent that we can imagine. Where there's accessibility with the technology and all those things, we can help them hopefully kind of reach their full potential. And that's some of the work that very much excites me in what we're doing and excites me about bringing artists deep into our work, our technology, our business, and our philosophy. So I'll conclude this part by saying, in my view, machine intelligence, artificial intelligence, creativity is absolutely not the same as human intelligence and creativity. It couldn't possibly be. By the way, I just described how human intelligence and creativity manifests as best we understand it today. And we have a long way to go, even in the neuroscience field, to understand that more deeply. I do not believe in the way humans are creative and humans are intelligent, that machines will be able to surpass that. But the technology and the algorithms and the machines have other forms of value that they add, that they can do things at a greater speed, a bigger scale than we as humans can. And when we understand where they add value and where we add value, and we kind of operate in parallel and together, that's where I believe the future lies. And that's where, for me, I get quite excited about this type of work. Okay, so to extend kind of that way of thinking, and maybe to give a slightly different example, there is a lot of hype and buzz about the metaverse today. And I'm not going to explain here in my slides about what the metaverse is, other than to say the metaverse, in my view, is the natural evolution of the internet today, where everything on the internet today is two-dimensional, linear, text-based. So you go to a web page, it's all 2D, you scroll down linear through the text. That's the web of today, largely. The metaverse is the evolution of the web, where everything becomes 3D, everything becomes immersive, everything becomes dynamic. So it's a evolution of the 2D internet today to be closer to how we as humans interact with the physical 3D world around us. And then there's all other stuff about Web 3.0 and decentralization and NFTs that comes along with that. And I'm not going to talk about that here, but happily can do a follow-up with anyone that's interested on those topics. Some other time we can connect online. So in the metaverse, there's this evolution, either fully virtual, and that's what a lot of people in technology and media are pitching, is that you're going to be all fully immersed in this virtual world. But the metaverse is also not just virtual, it can be hybrid, physical and virtual. It can be augmented reality, where you physically walk through the physical world, but you get your information is augmented, or your experience is augmented with digital and virtual overlays with the physical. And I'm quite interested in that version of the metaverse, because again, it connects us to our humanity and grounds our humanity in the physical, which is a core part of us as humans, in my view. But there's a lot of work and a lot of hype about going into the virtual. So if we bring people into the virtual, and if we were to go by this vision where your entire existence is like in a 3D game, and some people describe the metaverse as that, and I think it's a very limited way of describing it and understanding it, but that's where the hype is today. I think a lot about, well, what happens to our humanity when we go into the virtual, and pretty much 99% of the time today and in the foreseeable future, your human experience is dominated by one sense, which is your visual sense, right? And there's very little human experience in the aural sonic side of things in the metaverse today. It's very weak in comparison to how humans engage with the physical world around us sonically today. So it's all visually dominated. So in a way, in a slightly provocative, hyperbolic way, I could argue that today and in the foreseeable future, we remove or we lose 4/5 of our sensory perception when we bring people into the virtual today. Now, if our humanity is premised on our sensory perception largely, and that sensory perception is what connects us to the outside world and to our inner world, like our inner selves, and then that data, and however that data, it gets manifested in an interesting way in our brain. And that's literally what humans are, right? I mean, our entire social constructs and our models of everything and our worldviews is something happens in here, because all that data comes together, connected with your lived experience, cultural experience, and like genetics passed on, right? It's all that coming together. So if we lose 4/5 of that, what happens if the future of humanity, connected through technology, is largely based in a virtual environment? This for me is actually quite worrying. And I think about in the last 10 years of the internet, and I think about some of the, what I would call digital global pandemics that have emerged in the internet of today, which are like things like digital loneliness, fake news, and trolling, just to name three. Now think about, we move all of our internet technological human experiences into a virtual, where we're really only operating on one of our senses. And I know I've just listed the 5 primary ones here that everyone knows. I know there's about 27 or more generally. So I'm even being very generous here when I say about like we've lose 4/5. It's probably even more than that, right? When you think about all the other various human senses we have. So this is a really big question for me. And the work we are doing, and the work we're doing deeply with the artists, and I'll give you an example, well, just one example on the next slide, is we're taking how they are very, very strongly grounded in the human condition, how deeply they think about the intersection of humanity, technology, and society. And we're working with them to kind of ground how we build out what we are doing in the metaverse at EY. And we call what we're doing the EY-verse, which is how EY is going to operate in the metaverse. I won't really talk about that here, but we're grounding it deeply and working with the artists in a very meaningful, long-term, purpose-driven way to have that human-centered approach based on what we understand today as the human condition and human lived experience. We're building that into how we build out these virtual or hybrid physical virtual environments. So here's an example of that we're working on at the moment, and we haven't gone public with this work yet, so it's a kind of a little bit of a fun sneak peek in a way, and we hope to be able to show this publicly quite soon. So we're working with an artist called Kate Mock-Teager. Sorry, I should have said I live in New Jersey. I'm from Sligo, but I'm in New Jersey the last 6 years or so. And, we end up doing a lot of, well, we do work with artists all over the world, but because I'm in the New York area, and there's a lot of talent in the New York area, we end up doing quite a lot of work there. And Kate is an artist designer, and she identifies as being on the autistic spectrum disorder. So she is neurodivergent. And when she was younger, I mean, still today, but when she was younger in particular, she had a hypersensitivity to certain colors and textures in the physical world, in real life. And, she came up with coping mechanisms to be able to, manage and get through with that. But that hypersensitivity made her hyper aware to things in the physical world that those of us that are, quote unquote, neurotypical, we're just oblivious to. We don't see those textures. We don't see that nuance. We don't see that detail. But because of her hypersensitivity, she became hyper aware of this. And she took that lived experience, her insights, to her work, and she creates these fantastical, unbelievable, mega scale physical installations where you go in and it's different colors and different textures, and it takes your brain to a whole new place. And when you come out of them, you have this hyper awareness of the physical world around you because of how she has taken what are things we're oblivious to normally, but she is hypersensitive to, and she kind of exploded them out into a mega scale, off the charts from an experiential point of view, really gets the brain working in a new way. And then you come out of that physical, fantastical environment, and all of a sudden you're seeing new things in the physical world. Now, how we're working with Kate is we're actually taking all of her lived experience, all of her insights, all of her understanding of the brain and emotions and all of these things. I would call them chains of persuasion. And we're taking that and building, or trying to build as best we can, variants of that or versions of that in the virtual. So that you come into a virtual environment and it'll actually trigger you to be more aware of what's going on in your physical environment around you, even though you might be fully or partially in the virtual. And there's very interesting concepts of chains of persuasion here, like how you tap into human memory and lived experience. Even though you're in the virtual, you can kind of trigger some of that based on how you've lived in the physical world. And all of these kind of things, we're tapping into the neuroscience of this, working with artists to be able to create much more human-centric variants of these virtual or hybrid environments. Okay, so I see I'm at 20 minutes, so I'm going to finish up very quickly here because I want to have time for some engagement. So the Cognitive Human Enterprise is all about investing in massively interdisciplinary collaboration, full spectrum diversity to create cognitively diverse teams and organizations. And my particular work, there's very many ways of doing this, but I believe the quickest accelerator or accelerant towards that is bringing artists together with technologists like I've been describing. Anyone that's interested, follow up with me online or take a screenshot of this, or I'll happily share my thinking on why I bring artists together with technologists. And in very short, is because in my experience, the vast majority of the artist creative community think a very different way and create value in a very different way to those in technology, engineering, and the kind of physical sciences. It's a totally different way of everything: communication, world models, ways of creating value, ways of solving problems. So I believe when I can take these two worlds that I think are the two most distinct or different ways of doing everything on the planet together and create value out of that, I think that is then extensible to any other form of diversity of thought or experience or lived experience or any of these kind of aspects. So just to wrap up, and then I'd love to have a bit of a conversation. Human intelligence and creativity is not the same as machine intelligence and creativity. I think intelligence is just it's a kind of a shame that word is what's being used. I don't believe that technology will surpass human intelligence for the reasons I said, but I think they'll have other forms of intelligence, and I wish maybe we could come up with a better word together for what that might be. It's a little bit tricky. I think the future is, and the people that will win in a human-centric world of the future is where you embrace and understand humans times machines rather than humans versus machines. And at EY, we're investing very heavily in this capability to bring artists with very diverse lived experiences, very different ways of thinking, deep into how we build out our technology and our business. So with that, I'd like to leave it there and have a bit of a conversation, if that makes sense.
Donald, that was fantastic. Please. So, Donald, that was fantastic. You, because the technology is so limited, will not realize there's now a buzz in this room and there are a lot of cameras going up and a lot of people looking for links. So we're going to take some questions from the room. I'm going to feed some back that I've got online first, but I'm going to ask one of my own to start with, which is, you bring together these very different ways of thinking. You're very much thinking about into the future, going forward. Where do you look for examples of that? You came from Bell Labs, which is one example of trying to do that. I wonder if there's any others, or maybe you could talk a little bit about Bell Labs.
Yeah, it's I think there's a couple of kind of limited or narrow examples out there. I really believe that we're desperately, with a lot of hard work and investment, trying to push this out into the world and push this as a new model. I don't believe people go far enough.
Yeah.
And we could even talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion investment in academia or business if you want. And I think that that can be driven and invested in a very narrow way as well. So we're trying to be as inclusive and as diverse as we possibly can. Now, of course, in my world, I can only do so much, and I'm very much focusing on artists, but within the breadth of the diversity of artists, we're tapping into that throughout the humanness of artists, right? So even though I'm focusing on artists with technologists, we've got the breadth of the diversity in technology, which is limited enough, right? We all know that. But I've also tapping into the breadth of human lived diversity across the world in the artistic community, and trying to bring those different diversities and points of difference together, and how we build common ground first to be able to then leverage the differences. That's what a lot of my work is about. So there's other limited examples in academia and some in industry. I would argue they're not even going close to far enough. And we're kind of really working hard to try and get the message out there to educate and help people understand. There has to be frameworks. You need to fundamentally understand what's going on. You need to understand human dynamics. You need to understand culture change. You need to understand organizational design. You need to be very strategic. You need to do all these things, because if you don't do all those things, this type of initiative is absolutely going to fail, and fail very quickly.
Great, fantastic. We'll take a question from the floor, I think. Please.
Thanks very much indeed, Donald. That was fascinating. You proposed that artificial intelligence cannot be creative, but I was struck by the DeepMind game of Go when they beat the Go champion of the world. And all the Go experts of the world were watching this game. And the machine made this outrageous opening move or very early on in the game that they all just laughed at and shook their heads. There was nothing in the history of Go had ever, and they don't know how or why the machine did that, but it beat the Go champion of the world. That, in my mind, was clear evidence of creativity.
Okay, I have a different take on that. I believe that was brute force computational power. That machine spent thousands upon thousands upon thousands of hours. They trained that machine on human data, human gameplay in Go. They trained it over all of the experts over months upon months upon months in a supercomputer. And that supercomputer then ran literally millions of simulations in parallel to find all these opportunities. And it came up with a different one, maybe. And I see this is the challenge with the definition of creativity and what we really think of it. I personally do not view that as creativity. I view that as computational brute force. And you apply a much computational brute force to a very narrow problem like that, yeah, the algorithms are definitely going to come up with different insights. They're going to do pattern recognition in new ways. And this is the true value of machine learning. I'm not dismissing machine learning. I'm just dismissing it in the context of it supplanting our human creativity. So I have a different view of that entirely. And I'll put it this way. Here's how I think about creativity. And here's like a counter example. If that machine wasn't trained by a supercomputer for months and months and months on millions and millions and millions of points of data, what could the machine come up with? But we know, like with a human child, very young in life, very little lived experience, very little training, education, maybe limited ways of communicating. We know that children can be super creative without needing a supercomputer and all this computation. And I appreciate the question, and I appreciate that sentiment, but I think fundamentally what that machine did and those algorithms did is fundamentally different to human creativity.
So I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to take two questions and I'm going to come back, because part of the role of creativity is to be disruptive and to challenge and provoke, and so we need to hold that in the room. Also, it reminds me that Anna Abrahams, who will talk on Monday afternoon, will talk about the difference at a neurological perspective from creativity, from divergent thinking, from additive thinking. I'd like to take a question from the floor again.
Donald Brian Quinn here, and wonderful presentation, and we could talk for hours on this. I'd like to build on the theme of what is creativity. You take scenarios where you have an artist that you work with versus the brute force scenario from the compute. The artist has 20, 30 years of lived experience that brings them to a point in time where they can be creative, as against a computer that you may call it brute force. So I wonder, and I'm a technologist, at the heart of this is a trust, and really understanding what the computer is doing in a context where it has suggested something, made a recommendation or a decision, and that will be a key journey for us to travel as humans, to really trust what computer artificial intelligence systems are saying to us.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Just to comment on it, I think trust is a big issue. Lack of trust, lack of understanding is causing a lot of fear. The fact that, I mean, this is starting to slightly change only recently, but the fact that the people that designed the algorithms of machine learning don't actually understand what goes on deep in the various layers of the neural net is something that, you know, a lot of people find very concerning. And also, of course, the very concerning thing is, where is the data coming from? Like, the data is coming from, sometimes it can be coming from a bunch of white guys from a university somewhere in the world who live a certain way and are trained a certain way, and their lived experience can be relatively similar. And that data then is being pushed out in an algorithm as if it's a silver bullet to solve all of the world's problems. And of course, that is an issue, and it's not correct, and that causes a lot of trust issues as well. So I agree completely. It's very important.
So Donald, if you've got time, we'll take 2 more questions. Can we do that? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
There's one here.
My name is Willie Van Straten. I've got a simple question. You talk about the results that you've achieved so far, and we understand conceptually the fact between the clash of the machine and the man versus the corporation. Practically, how do you implement that combination? Because that will be valuable to many business people in many fields. Have you got a methodology? Have you got a tool? How do you actually create that interaction between the machine and the man?
Dominic, can you repeat that? Because I couldn't hear that.
My question is, how do you combine the man with the machine? You've said you've achieved great results. Have you got a methodology, or have you got a tool or a technique how you can achieve that outcome, which is improved creativity by combining the human mind with the machine?
Yeah, it's a way of working, it's a framework, and the way of working is to understand that you can't automate out the human intelligence and the human creativity part. So when I talk about humans and machines, and our solution and our framework, and the way we can scale is not scaling through automation, but the way we can scale it through a new way of working is that when we bring our artists together with our technologists, our engineers, our scientists, and we bring the artists deep into what we're doing as complete parts of our team, like not just a superficial extremity like they are treated often today, but we bring them deeply in. So we're having conversations at the start of the process. You know, what does an algorithm mean? What is the data? What does it mean to be a human in this context of the problem we're trying to solve? And we're always, like, at the very core of everything we do, that questions of humanity, questions of the human condition are at every part of how we're building out the technology. So I don't have a tool, or I don't have a website that I can send you to. It's a complete purposeful, intensive, very collaborative new way of working, by bringing these different perspectives, lived experiences, different everything, and bringing them purposefully together in this way. And the human condition, our humanity, is always the core, and everything else kind of just is a spoke out from that and in service to that.
Part of the human condition is that we have to move really fast and improvise. We're going to take 2 more questions and then we have to go. But we can carry this online because we have technology that enables us to do that. One question from the room.
Hi, Donald. I found your presentation both compelling and invigorating. And I'm wondering, between you and Dominic, is this presentation going to be available online afterwards? Because I really need to revisit it. Yeah. I am so excited about what you're saying. Well done.
So Sarah, if you take the mic round, I can explain that. But as we do it, we can move at speed. So all of these conversations are recorded. All of these conversations are going to be available afterwards. But this isn't a locked service. We're not trying to tie things up in a bow. We're never going to solve all of the problems that we've raised today. What we're going to do is raise and ask more questions. We won't be able to get to all the questions, and the role of art and creativity is to be disruptive and to challenge and to provoke. So I want to come back to the first question.
Thanks, Donald. You're much more knowledgeable than I am in this, but my understanding was you don't have to train DeepMind on thousands and thousands of human games. You only have to teach it. Now you only have to teach it the rules. It plays itself, and it comes up with extraordinary novel solutions.
Maybe. But the thing is, then it's a very, again, here's the issue I have with that. What people do is, and it happens in the media, they take a very narrow example of Go, where the machine betters the best in the world, and then they extend that to every other part of humanity, every other part of society, and all of a sudden people are saying, oh no, the machine bet the human in Go. Go's a very complex game. Now we're all done. Like, humanity is done for. The machines are coming. We're all in big trouble. And that's one of the problems I have with it. It's not extensible like that. There's peculiarities about Go, and there's models and mathematics behind it, and that's why it's very easy for the machine. But try and get the machine to create a piece of artwork that a human would actually appreciate, can't do it. And the reason I'm kind of quite particular about this is that I know a lot of artists that are the best in the world at computer generated art, machine learning, AI art, and music and all these things. And I know them, and I know how they do their work. And when they present the seemingly machine creativity thing to the world, and it goes mega scale popular, in actual fact, 99.999% of the entire process to get to that was human creativity. And it's only like a tiny, tiny fraction of that had anything to do with the machines. All the creativity is in the human. So I'm sure, and I appreciate the question. I'd love to have a follow-up and go into this a bit deeper. But when you peel away a couple of layers of the onion and you work with the people that are in it and you understand it, you see that there's a lot of hype about creativity in technology, or the technology being creative or intelligent. And anytime it's a very, very narrow example that is not extensible to the breadth of humanity or lived experience or society.
So we have to bring this session to a close, because time is what it is, and because people are generous in their contributions at whatever part of the world they're in. If you want to continue this online, you can find each other digitally, or you can go to #BringYourBrain or to the creativebrainweek.com website. I'd like to express a huge thanks to the people in the room, and also to Donald Hernan from EY for his contribution. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.